Welcome to this episode of the Grow Free with Emma B podcast. These are conversations with peers and practitioners around our monthly theme. And our theme for June and July in the Grow Free community is attunement and archetypes. And these are things like many things that have been mystical and out there to me over the years, but are really starting to make sense, like really starting to make embodied sense, something that I can actually grasp onto and feel. And they're both key resources for moving beyond trauma. And they're both resources that are really affected by the traumas that we've experienced. Attunement is feeling into, processing and responding to our inner subtle sensations, the environment around us, the people around us, into the feeling of a project, into sounds, into music, into energy. But when we're burdened by traumas, we get cut off from our instrument of attunement, our body. This is dissociation, and it's common and collective. I really love the way that Thomas Hubl describes this, and I'll put a link in below in the show notes to a video that he's done on this. He really combines sort of ancient terms with contemporary context and parlance, and I love the way he speaks about really tapping in and how we can move in towards, or how information gets frozen within us, how we receive downloads or don't receive downloads. And archetypes are another field of embodied resource that are forgotten when we get stuck in traumatic imprints. I was having a conversation with John Cree after our recent workshops, walking along Benahee, and we were like kind of grappling a little bit with what are archetypes, and at that point on the hills we came up with they're embodied metaphors. But as I was writing a kind of introduction for this theme in this podcast, and what came to me was the archetypes are like embodied constellations of qualities, knowledge and skills, and they're often communicated in human form, like gods or deities, or like the warrior archetype. But they're also can be totems or power animals or plants or planets. And it seems that for generations, instead of this kind of information, this kind of knowledge and skill and wisdom flowing through us and informing our way of being, it's been frozen by the traumas we've experienced collectively, and we've been hijacked by limited parts or personalities that are burdened with traumas and that are relentless in trying to protect us from the dangers that these traumas carry. And they're going to keep on hijacking us, and they're going to keep on trying to protect us until we release them. And so many of us, I would imagine so many of you listening, have been in that process of releasing, whether consciously or unconsciously. A lot of the frozen past and experience that we've all been holding in our bodies has been coming up. Maybe it's been whacking us in the face, maybe it's been pulling us down, maybe we've felt a lot of grief or shame or regret. Our experiences will be different, but for sure this is a collective process, and we're at the cusp of this journey of consciousness, I feel, and I've heard others describe, that's been taking humanity into separation and trauma, and we're on this turning point coming back into unity consciousness. And it's not any kind of experience or process to sniff at. Like, it's intense. It's intense, even for those people that I know who seem to be like ahead of me on the journey, full of archetypes and resource. I know they're finding it intense. There's, you know, it's a big process. We're evolving at a fast pace. There's a lot of release and detox and information and emotion and actual physical toxins been coming up to the surface. And the Grow Free community is something that I supported. I co-founded with some other peers to be a safe playground for going through this process, for going through it with a community of peers and practitioners, where we bring together perspective, practices, resources, and opportunities for growth within a nest of ongoing peer support. Regular opportunities to just be held and heard, to let the vulnerability find a voice that it those unheard needs, those unheard stories. We've got a growing seasonal calendar of courses and gatherings and retreats, and you can find out more about that and them on our online community platform on the Mighty Networks platform. Today, I'm delighted to share an opportunity from one of our elder members. And there's part of me that kind of squirms at the term elder or referring to somebody as an elder because of the connotations that elderly has had in our society, not being something that's been venerated or honoured or supported. It's almost like we're this idea of being older, or, you know, we're kind of on the rubbish heap almost. But that's exactly this. Like, I don't think elder necessarily relates massively to a linear age, you know, a chronological age, but to an archetype, to a way of being, someone who's lived and experienced and learned and integrated and is holding a place in community. And Lorna Bailey is definitely one of these people for me. I don't want to introduce you too much, Lorna. From what I know from our meetings so far, in a couple of sentences, I could say that it sounds like, having started a lot of your adult life living in an Indigenous community, a lot of this process was kickstarted for you way back, and you've been, you know, working through this journey for longer than although I feel like I was going through this journey, but maybe backwards and sideways and through the fence and hedges at times. But what would you say then to introduce us, if you're thinking about the theme that we're on? How would you introduce us to your personal experience with burdens, with attunement, and with archetypes? Who, for example, were your role models growing up? What kind of burdens have you carried? What can you tell us?
Okay, well, thank you for inviting me on this podcast, Emma. It's very timely actually. And I've been thinking about the questions that you'd sort of put to me around what to bring today, and what were my earliest burdens that I carried, and how did that inform the work that I'm doing now, which is about supporting women primarily to bring in new archetypes that haven't been spoken or seen or heard before, to be able to move into a thriving life state from out of deep survival patterning, which appear through the body of work that I'm bringing as what we call the burden carriers. And for me, my own burdening, when I look back, really began because I was born into a family where my mother had multiple sclerosis. And so right out the gate, and as a young child, I took on a lot of the family role of caring for her. and taking care of my siblings, and not being able to have the childhood that I would have been able to have had my mum been in full health, because she was working at that time, and my dad was as well. They both worked jobs, not knowing that my mum had this diagnosis, but she'd been dealing with health issues since she was in her late 20s. So the burden for me was one of was literally carrying and holding that, you know, within my psyche. And I remember my biggest role model really was my father, who had a very balanced energy. He was very calm, he was very solid, and he felt very rock-like, which I came to find, you know, in these last recent years when this archetype work was coming through, and it literally has been downloaded through into my being, that we have an archetypal face of female that's known as Stone Woman, and that she appears as she's solid and she's heavy and she's tight. And that was just how my father appeared, because these sacred faces of female aren't just gender based. Although they're the sacred faces of female, they apply to both genders. Though the workshop work I do, I take women to meet the woman of that, because that's how she's presenting. So for my dad, it was like, he was like this rock. And I remember thinking, this is how to deal with everything that is going on. I just need to be very calm and very solid, and just be very grounded in this pool of a lot of chaos that's going on around me. And as I got a little bit older and into my teens, for me, you know, my biggest role models really came through the spiritualist churches that I was involved with as a teenager, because the people who were running those, the mediums, they were helping me make a connection with spirit. And so they were teaching me about meditation and how to actually be in that calm place that you can reach through meditation, rather than just going into effectively what was a freeze response of just, I've just got to hold this pattern of what's going on in the house, you know. And I would often find that people would say to me, friends, you know, even in the playground when I was younger, and if ever there was an exam or anything coming up, you know, kids would be really kind of nervous, but I would be the very sort of calm. But I wasn't like that on the inside. But I appeared like that, and I'd created such a good mask by the time I was a teenager that it took years to just unravel that, even for myself, and actually go, well, this is a burden that I'm carrying.
So the stone woman is a burden.
She's a burden carrier.
Yeah.
She's a burden carrier. Yeah.
Almost that unspoken vulnerability underneath.
Yeah, and holding that. Okay. And yeah, working with that stone within, the granite within, the rock within, chipping away what it is, so you can see what is inside the vulnerability of that. And that's been part of my journey in Aberdeenshire, actually, surrounded by all the granite. It was a perfect place to really sort of feel what is there. And what I've noticed is a lot of the Scots, people that I have known over my life, is like there's a stoicism about them. They hold it in their body. It's almost like they are like the living rocks. It's like they've been born out of the granite. And then yet underneath, you know, there is another story that is there. And so it's interesting looking at people from the geography and from the land that they're in, and how that will show up in terms of how the body grows and develops in those environments, and how they're embodying things as well. When you look at desert people who are living in, you know, Arabia and different places like that, where they're shifting sands, everything's moving all the time, you know, and there's a completely different energy field around those. Again, when you look at people who live in the frozen north, you know, there's an energy signature that they carry that is reflected of the land that they're in. So that was part of the work that's been going on. But yeah, the burdens growing up were you know, were many. And my time that I spent in New Mexico, undergoing a dismantling of myself when I left Southeast London when I was 25. I went to North America and began an apprenticeship with a Native American elder, became part of his family and circle, and really began the unraveling of myself. And one of the names, the spirit names that I was given, which denoted part of my medicine, but also part of the name that I carry, was Mahashima, which translates as many mother woman. And many mother woman also came through as one of the burden carriers. And it was interesting because it was a name that I didn't really like using very often. I kept it and I carried it, but I didn't always voice it unless it was in certain ceremonies where it became important to bring that spirit aspect forward. But the many mother woman, I think many women can identify with as a title, because the many mother woman carries the weight of the fold. That was how it was downloaded. It's the woman who is a mother to the community. She's a mother to her children. She's a mother to her friends. She's got that nurturing capacity, which draws and magnetizes people to her because she carries it. But if she's carrying it alone and she's not in sisterhood, or she's not in community where there are other Mahashimas that are there,
or she's not been allowed to say no when she was growing up. Not been allowed
to say no, yeah. And so it builds and builds, and then she's not able to discharge it. And so with this body of work, there's 22 thriving faces of female that have come through, and there are 14 burden carriers. And part of my work is bringing this through as living embodiments. So when I first met these archetypes, we'll call them, but to me they're living consciousnesses, and they said we're embodiments. You know, they were quite, it was like, we're not archetypes.
Oh, they didn't like that word. Okay.
No, it was like, that's so Jungian, that's so last cycle. It's like that's so male. It's like, no, we are living embodiments.
Okay.
We're actually living embodiments. We're not of the mind. We actually exist.
So we need a different word.
We need a different word.
Okay.
So they came as the living embodiments. And part of my journey when I moved to Scotland, just as lockdown happened, was that as the world went silent, my life got incredibly busy on the inside, because I started getting these embodiments come through and actually started to feel what they were really like on the inside. And together with a spirit sister who I'd been living in America with, I was speaking to her about this journey, and I said, I think there's going to be maybe an oracle deck that will come out of these. You know, they're going to be cards. They're going to be workshops. I can see this growing. And she said, I'm really feeling guided that I need to paint these for you. Now, she was an untrained artist at the time, but the images that she is creating are absolutely out of this world. They literally are out of the world. They're from another dimension, and they're from another place. But what that's meant is that in the true the true spirit of sacred feminine embodiment, which is what I'm all about, it's like, it's not doing it by yourself. So I've got a sister alongside me. She's painting them as I'm bringing the information through. She's bringing information through, which is informing, and we're building this body of work together. And so 3 years on, we're almost halfway through now, but it's been a white knuckle ride, not only for ourselves, but for
everyone around you,
for everyone around us and the partners.
You've been journeying with these.
Raging Woman was described as one of the worst.
Rage Woman.
Raging Woman came through, which was very interesting, because women are taught not to show rage. I mean, we get angry, but rage is a very forbidden thing. And it was interesting that the Raging Woman didn't come as a burden carrier, but she actually came as a thriving face.
Oh, that's interesting.
And it was to be able to access your rage for those things where there's been injustice is a powerful healing tool to release those things. So yeah, it was interesting. So there is a poem that came through for the 14 burden carriers, which is interesting.
That's
to
something you'd like to read. Can I just make one comment on the raging woman stuff? Because I mean, I've got a 5-year-old daughter, and interestingly, with other parents, you know, some who've got boys, some girls, often one of the kind of the things we're like, whoa, how do we deal with this? Is with the rage that comes out of our daughters, and finding that way of allowing it and channeling it rather than squishing it down, huh?
Yeah. Well, interesting. When Raging Woman came, what followed closely thereafter was the White Horse Woman. Now, the White Horse Woman is about embodied action, and she came literally, you know, butt up to the end of Raging Woman, basically almost at the same time, because what came through was, when that fire of that rage comes upon you, you have to direct it in a way that is safe and healthy and creative, so that it doesn't destroy the very thing that it's coming out through. And I think this is part of why women generally have struggled with rage, because it's a frightening thing, it's a scary thing. I think it's something that men can often express or tap into, but for women, I think it stays very stuffed down in the body, and that level of fire energy, I think, can end up becoming very toxic to the body, as we know, with the trauma, and can lead to chronic inflammation, and then goes on to become disease.
Yeah.
And I think that is part of it. So, but having a place, you know, having safe rage places to go, I think, is going to be part of the work going forward, as we work more and more with trauma, because it is an element that needs to be held in a safe way, with you know, in a good way.
Yeah, that's something I want to have when we're doing like our peer gardening groups here, for example, a punch bag up, or a horse whip to take, you know, so when we have those feelings that need to come out, finding some kind of release with focus. And voice is a big part of that as well, isn't it, I guess?
Oh, absolutely.
Even with rage, do you find? For me, for rage as well, for the voice, is that a good outlet?
Yeah, I think for what I do with the drum work and the sacred voice work, as you'll know, through the Cygnus moon circles that I hold, offshoots of that are being able to tap into that in the body, to be able to make it a sound, because they're primal sounds. They're primal sounds, but they have to have a container where they're kind of witnessed and they're held, because it's very depleting on the body. It's a hard thing to move through by yourself. You know, because it can literally take you, you know, out, because that fire literally will burn through.
Well, I also
burn through whatever's there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still not completely clear on this, but what I'm feeling is that there's some things you can release on your own in the woods, in nature, and obviously nature can witness you. And then for me, there's other things that take, I don't know, for me, it's needed another human being to draw it out a little, like you did in that one of the circles. There was a call and response going on between us that was bringing something up out of my body. So we've really touched in on this, the current work. So you've got a body of, I can't remember the numbers of the burden women and
there's 14 burden carriers, and there's 22 sacred faces of females. Faces.
And that's so funny that they told you not to call them archetypes, and I've called this theme archetypes. That's hilarious.
Oh, they're happy to come along for that. You know, they came along anyway. They're very curious, you know. It's like, it's kind of funny, isn't it? We're moving into this time now where we're so encouraged to work with all of these lost parts, where if you go back a few decades, if you just had one other voice in your head, they thought you were going crazy. And now it's like, if you've only got one voice, it's like you kind of need to have a few more than that.
Come on, join the party. And you've got various ways that people can work with you with this kind of package, or this work. You spoke about oracle cards,
Yeah, that will be coming out some point in the future.
Yeah.
That'll be a while. At the moment, what I'm offering
Yeah.
is will be workshops, small, what I'm calling immersions. There's one that I'm going to be hosting on the 9th of July in Boyne.
That's
And
up
it's
in Aberdeenshire. Yeah.
Yeah, in Aberdeenshire. And it's for the sacred face of Lotus Woman. And the reason Lotus Woman is out front, really, out of all of the faces, even though she didn't arrive first, she was actually I think she was the 4th face that came through. But the Lotus Woman is very much around how you transform the suffering, you transform those things that are beyond the feeling states in the body. How do you access those so that you can actually be in your sexual nature as a woman in a very feminine way, in that very sacred way, and how you can really reconnect to that primal essence, because the lotus seed itself can be dormant in a seed form for hundreds of years. And when Lotus Woman arrived, she said, I'm dormant, I'm sleeping in every woman, and I'm in the mud, I'm in the soil and the water, deep in the root. But I have to be called. There has to be a surrendering for me to actually break open and to be seen. And so I take women on a shamanic journey into an altered state of consciousness, where they actually journey into the body and connect with that lotus seed and allow it to break open and actually become the Lotus Woman. So I take them through the steps of holding that so that they become the roots, they become the stem, they become the petals of the flower, they become the leaves. And from that, the beautiful thing about Lotus Woman is that when she first landed in my body, I was sitting up in bed one morning, and I just felt myself surrounded by all of these lily pads. They were just lily pads. I hadn't realized that Lotus Woman had arrived in the room in my body, and I sort of opened my eyes and was like, this is a bit of a sliding door moment, but there's all of these lily pads around me. And I realized, I looked at my body and I'd actually become this lotus. And what she was showing me was that the roots, if you look at the roots on the lotus flower, they're like the umbilical cords. And they draw up the nutrient from the environment that they're in through the soil, the mud that's under the water, and the water of the emotions is there, and everything's moving. And if you look at a lotus flower, when it sits on a lily pond, on the pad, it's just opening to the sun, it's opening to the light. And it's held by all the oxygen that's running through the stems. So it's very connected with breath. And bringing that, reoxygenating that spirit body to actually come awake. And then the lily pads, they like formed all of this like membrane boundary that was all around. And we talk a lot about the protection around ourselves and boundaries, and what does that mean? And what I was shown was that when you connect in with Lotus Woman, what happens is if you're in a situation that's challenging for you with other people, you drop into Lotus Woman and suddenly you're in this pond, you're in a pool. That's the thing with Lotus Woman. She's not in an ocean, she's not in a massive river, she's in a contained container, which is why she came through as one of the primal faces to bring out early on. But as the lily pads are all surrounding, it's like it forms this very gentle distance between yourself and the other, where you're connected to everything, but you're being held in your own sacred container. And so for about 2 months, while we were working with Lotus Woman and she was being painted and was coming through, there was this deep connection with the deepest core of myself that was going on. And wherever I was walking, I could feel like these lily pads around me. And I just felt really able to just be in any situation and not really be overly affected by it. And so one of the beautiful things about these faces is that once they've embodied and they're awake and they're alive in you, they're always there. So now wherever I go, there's Lotus Woman. if I
It's like,
tune into that frequency. And so suddenly the burdens, when the burden carriers bring up whatever those things are there from that survival state, it's like there's this sisterhood that is there
yeah,
going, I'm here for you. Bring me your burden.
yeah,
This is what you need. You need the lotus woman energy, or you need the red blanket woman energy to come and put her arms around you, put that red blanket of destiny around you, and remind you that you know about what herbs to take, what plants to work with shamanically. You know about earth healing, which is the root of what red blanket woman is about, you know.
Well, I don't know about anyone else, but as I'm listening to this, I felt like the seeds of Lotus Woman getting activated a little bit, and I'm like,
yeah,
no, I was like, 9th of July, not the 8th, not maybe the 7th before I go away.
Well, I'll be coming back again hopefully in October, because it's really my passion to really bring this work to all women, you know, because, and it is shamanically rooted, which is my background and training, but I'm very much of that school of thought that this is an embodiment practice that every woman can do. You know, you just need to be able to have the container held for you, and I'll guide you there, because this is your birthright, to be able to be connected with this constellation of inner faces of female. Because what I believe has happened and what I've been shown is that humanity's been running from a survival program, as you said in the beginning, for such a long time now. And so the burdens are always going to be there. The burden carriers are always going to be activated. But if we're to really step into thriving life and really switch on that prefrontal, you know, cortex of the brain, then these activations actually create the pathway for that. And they actually bring the integration in. And I think it's a beautiful unfolding. And at some point in the future, I know that, you know, I hope it's my hope that there'll be a Lotus Man workshop for men, you know, where they can tune into their seed, their lotus seed, and become the flowering and opening of that, the red blanket man, the raging man, you know, that can actually come and support men with their anger. Because with these faces and these archetypes, if you want, you know, to use that language, it's like they're giving permission for that to exist and to be as part of as part of the soul of that person. And they've been shut away, you know, they've been blocked away, and they're returning home. And it's so funny with the paintings, because, you know, my sister will say to me, what face is coming next? I'm like, I don't know. And then all of a sudden she'll arrive and she'll be like, yeah, I had a dream and I'm feeling that as well. And then we'll both journey together. And it's almost like I can feel them jostling in line a bit, you know, after we did the face of changing woman, which was very chaotic for the people around me at the time, because everything was moving. Yeah, it was like, you know, there's almost this jostling of, no, I'm next, I'm coming in. And it's like, okay, you're all going to get a chance.
When the ancestors come in, it's like that, isn't it? Because they've not been heard for so long.
Yeah, exactly.
I've been doing a lovely course with Thomas Hubl and Dick Schwartz of
internal family systems.
Yeah, and that's like a lot of the conversations are like, you know, they're opening a space, and then suddenly for lots of people it's like all these voices that need to be heard.
Taking Dick Short's work, I mean, I've followed his work for a long time, and Thomas Hubl, but the internal family systems model, it's very similar to this, but his work is around the protective parts, the protectors and the managers and the firefighters and all of that. But this work is around the sacred feminine and the sacred masculine. So they're actually, rather than being called a protector, they have a name, and they have a personality, and they have a role, and they've come to offer themselves sort of at this time.
I think it sounds like the work that you're doing now. Actually, I'm sure Dick Schwartz and Thomas Hubl would love to hear about this, because they really work. You know, this course anyway they're doing is about expanding the map from the personal trauma healing into the collective. And that's, you know, part of what it feels like you're package here is bringing in is
and I think what I
it's
really
making it collective. It's universal, isn't it? It's like it's not like only me with my bad part or my burden. It's like, oh no, we've all been carrying these similar threads of.
And it's a bit like the animal totems, like, you know, when you shamanically journey for a power animal and you say get a bear or a salmon, you know, it's not just that individual, it's the whole of that species that is coming. It's a whole of bear kind. And so, you know, stone woman and lotus woman, they're not just belonging to that woman, they belong to all women, because we all carry them. We're all part of that collective in that way, and yet they will show up very individually, you know, for ourselves, you know, of how those stories are, you know. And what was really interesting for me is that the burden carriers, what was being so beautiful is that they were, when the poem first landed, it was called Burden, and it literally landed in my whole being just before the March equinox a couple of years ago, and it literally left me bawling my eyes out for hours. I was due to go and do ceremony that day, but they all landed in my body, and it was like literally they all arrived at once. They literally woke up as a collective, and I remember thinking that I'm never going to be able to process this. It was just so much. But what came afterwards was when the burden carriers were coming forwards for the cards, they were saying, no, you know, we're here to hold, you know, those burdens. We're not the burden. We're the burden carriers. We carry your burdens. So when you tune into Stone Woman, it's like you can give her all that is hard and solid and tight and give it to the Stone Woman. You don't become you are the Stone Woman, but all the time you identify yourself as the Stone Woman. If you can see and go and meet Stone Woman, then you can say, oh, can you take these stones? That's her role.
Yes.
She carries that. Like the Raging Woman, that's her identity. She's Raging Woman. You give your rage to Raging Woman. And it's meeting those within yourself, and that's almost how you move the parts. It's how you give those bits away to those to be carried, but you have to integrate them within you first.
Oh, definitely. I think I might share this podcast with Thomas Hubl and Dick and see see where it leads. But I've got a feeling you might want to read the poem. But
yes, I can do. Yes,
before you do, just because you were back at Stone Woman there, I just had this sense of a potential collaboration up here with one of our members who works with clay and has been creating these clay faces of vulnerability. I can imagine they are like burden, whether burden carriers or the raw burden. But I could just imagine some kind of like hands-on immersion where we've got the granite, we've got the clay, maybe some natural pigment paint, and it could be
and actually create your own Stone Woman.
Or an experiencer from a lump of granite, softening into clay, perhaps, or
that's a really powerful thing. One of the workshops I ran called Infinite Woman many years ago, I was working with clay, and I wanted to bring part of the workshop so that women could actually create like an effigy, like of the mother goddess out of the clay as part of the workshop. And I was thinking, oh, I don't know how long this is going to take as part of the workshop. Maybe I'm going to have to do a dry run myself. So I got some clay, sat down, set a sacred space myself. As soon as I started working with the clay and I tuned in, what I realized was that I was creating myself. As I was pulling out the clay, I was actually creating a form of me that was there. And it was actually to do around miscarriage, which I hadn't grieved at all. And what actually happened was I created this clay figure that it looked exactly like my body without realizing it. It's like I'd completely molded it the same. And it was holding a baby, a newborn baby. And it was the first time that I'd ever let that grief go. But it was like I gave it somewhere to exist and to be on the altar. So I think when you're actually working with clay, when you're working with your hands, because it connects with the heart so viscerally. I think, you know, it's amazing to be what you can work, bring out of the body, you know, as you know, through art in various forms.
Okay, so if you're willing and keen, we'd love to hear your poem, and then I have one last question after.
Okay. Well, I'll read it out, but I invite you to maybe close your eyes or just to tune in and just see what comes up for you as you hear these women, because these are the burden carriers, and these are very tied in with the survival states that we know as ourselves, that bring about fight, flight, or freeze. And so these are the faces, the sacred faces, that then lead to those embodiment states. So the poem is called Burden. Shadow woman, distorted, cast out by her light. Stone woman, so heavy, solid and tight. Bone woman, bare of flesh and of skin. Lone woman keeps out those who yearn to come in. Come home woman has been gone for way too long. Lost woman is crying out to remember her song. Longing woman stretches out into thinness of shape, bereft like waiting woman who eternally waits. Begone woman wants out of her world and her pain, whilst burning woman is held out into fire and flame. And so, as hunted woman runs for her freedom and her life, so hidden woman disappears to be veiled from sight. Unlike many mother woman who carries the weight of the fold, empty vessel woman just exists, vacant and cold.
It's the second time you've read that poem today. None of them are unfamiliar.
You have to pick your microphone up, Emma. I can't hear you.
Oh,
there we go.
I was so tuned into the energy of that I forgot my microphone. Thanks for reminding me. Yeah, that's the second time you've read that poem to me, and wow, it's really like, you know, on one level, it's just completely dropped me into my body. Probably, yeah. I'm in a completely different state than I was before you read it, and yeah, all of them none of them felt unfamiliar. They were all like, oh yeah, I know her. Oh yeah, I know her. And I just love that way you described that they're burden carriers. That adds a whole new dimension from, you know, for me, from conversations we've had before of, you know, it can be one thing to identify the burdens within you and kind of be like, you know, kind of, well, still left with them, but to recognize them as burden carriers, as
well, what it does, it gives
it
gives them a place to exist within you. So whenever they come up, you can say, well, I can give it to this burden carrier, rather than feel like, oh, I'm still carrying that burden, because we're on a journey of healing where we're never going to be at the end of it. We're always going to be uncovering the layers. And when we've done all the personal healing, there's the collective and the ancestral and all of that. And I think this is why this body of work is coming through now, because it gives a place to take it in a sacred way.
Yeah, it's beautiful. So, I mean, that leads us beautifully into what I want to ask you as a closing is, well, I've written, what are you most excited about for the collective as we release these burdens and walk along life with these burden carriers and bring in these not archetypes but sacred, thriving embodiments, sacred faces as you've described them. And perhaps there's an element here of what are you most excited about, and maybe what would you see as the kind of challenges that we still face along the process of moving in that direction?
I think one of the challenges is for people who maybe aren't familiar with this kind of work to be able to not be afraid of going inward and being able to give life to other parts of their personality, and actually the ownership around all of that and the sovereignty around all of that. I think there's, as people are waking up more, I think it's becoming more acceptable to be able to kind of work with parts work, which is why I think the work of Richard, of Schultz and Thomas Hubl's work is really valuable at this time, because it is changing things for people. So I'm excited that this will take its place amongst all of that. But what excites me the most is that we can actually step out and grow within ourselves our own thriving life, of however that may look. And we'll have the tools and the resources and the integrated parts to be able to do that for possibly the first time ever. And what I'm really excited about is that there's many of these sacred faces that have come through, they feel like they come from 5 and 6D reality. When I look at the faces and we've got Infinite Woman, it's like, what's that going to be like when she fully lands? I mean, I've done an Infinite Woman workshop, but I realize I've only just stepped into that. So what's that going to be like when I step into that Infinite Woman embodiment in myself, and then can take other women there? So yourself as an infinite being.
Yeah.
And also there's a face called the elder, because one of the questions I asked when you go full circle to what you talked about eldership was, as I move into elderhood as a menopausal, postmenopausal woman now, where are my elders and where do I go to, and what's the sacred face around all of that? And what I was shown, it's one of the few faces that actually doesn't appear as a woman. It's a tree, and it was actually the elder tree. And I was shown that the elder tree was offering herself as the face of the elder tree woman. So that is an older woman. If you've got those elder woman concerns, you go to the elder tree, that she becomes a living embodiment. For me, it was like, wow, so we're actually returning to the forest.
That's my
we're
whole
returning to the forest. It's like, and she's offered that place. And we know that the elder tree, shamanically, is a very powerful tree, and she sees herself as the mother of the forest and has that clear pith that's all the way through. There's that very clear channel. There's also Phoenix Woman, and there's Shining Mirror Woman, which is to do with opening portals and time and gateways. But I think they're a ways off yet. I think as the consciousness is shifting, they will start coming in. I mean, these are definitely faces I don't pick and choose what's coming in next, because my excitement's like, well, I want to see what that one looks like. And it's like, no, they're forming their orderly queue. They'll come in as we need them. But it's exciting to me to feel like, our consciousness really is shifting and changing, and this work will support that. And we are becoming those, we talk about multidimensionality, and we're multidimensional beings, but how many of us and how much energy do we put into actually understanding what that means? But actually this is a multidimensional being that we're growing into. And there's these 22 sacred faces, and there's these 14 sacred burden carriers. And then what excites me even more is that I know that this will sit in parallel with a body of work for men. So my work is around sacred feminine embodiment, whether you show up as a man or a woman. But for men to be able to have this, that takes their work beyond the archetypes of the magician, the lover, the warrior, and the king, it's so limiting. when you look at actually what the fullness is there within a man and in his life, and what he needs support in growing with. So I'm really excited to see how this can grow to really support our brothers, you know,
well,
and the sons that are coming up.
But it's all, I mean, we're coming back into reunion, isn't it? Where I feel like while I don't know, there'll remain this honoring of the different roles in 3D. The kind of internal experience will become more and more unified. Who am I to say? I don't know. You know, I was so many things I could say. You know, a big appreciation for, but one of them, one thing I would really like verbalize here as appreciation towards you is that complete way you have of surrendering and not rushing to bring in white mirror woman, or you know, because in this process where there's been a lot of, you know, kind of a sense of threat in the world, you know, the human world, and urgency, you know, feeling finding ourselves where we're at, you know, when we're still in 4D or 5D can feel quite threatening. But you know, when I'm around you, I never have that sense from you that there's a big rush and we must do it all now. It's like, yeah, I see it, but it's okay. We'll go with the energy. And
well, I've been shown very much that this is my life's work now, and I'm planning to be around till I'm around 100. So
I'm planning longer. Yeah,
or maybe longer even.
Come on. Yeah, I think
I just and yeah, it's a journey of surrender that I've been on, and one of trust. And I know that it's because it's not coming from me, it's coming through me.
Yeah.
That I just need to be the vessel, and I just need to keep my own vehicle as clear as possible and follow the guidance. And even, you know, to the detriment of things that I would want to choose for myself sometimes. You know, I mean, we're currently on the face of Journey Woman, and that's been a big journey. And as you said earlier, a lot of my work is around doing work in Scotland, but also Suffolk, England, and in Kent. I've spent 2 years working with my dad as he's been transitioning with Parkinson's and dementia. So the journeying around that, it's like Journey Woman was there, you know, right through all of that process. And so all of these faces are coming all in alignment with what's going through in our lives. And there is no rush. I think that's part of where the trauma also sits, because there's a feeling like we've got to get somewhere. And actually it's just being in the present moment. And this work only really comes through when you're in that present moment. So it's a daily practice for me, as much as I'm able to within my vulnerable humanness. And taking me ever deeper, you know, into surrender.
Well, I love the fact that we've met and are walking this journey side by side. Let's just recap so that people know, you know, whether, you know, up in Aberdeenshire, your two events coming up are the Cygnus Moon Drumming Circle, for the solstice, just after the solstice on the 25th.
On the Sunday. The Sunday at Tornaveen Hall. 7 o'clock start, arrive from 6:30 onwards. £15 on the door, just come along. You don't need any experience.
And it is really a magical, wonderful, safe, supportive,
it's a ceremony
container. It's beautiful.
It's a ceremony. And then I will be running a Lotus Woman immersion for women who want to kind of drop into this sacred face of female work. I'll be at the Lodge on the Loch on the 9th of July.
That's
and
near
it'll be
Aboyne.
a day workshop in Aboyne.
And finding you online, people could find you through the Grow Free community platform. You're in there as a member.
There's a website as well, templeroom.co.uk, and I'm on Facebook
as Lorna Bailey.
Or the Temple Room.
And I'm
on WhatsApp, and I'm very open to you know, receiving communication through people through WhatsApp. I've got a WhatsApp temple room group as well that people can join as well, which I kind of put on updates around different things that I'm doing.
Brilliant. We'll put the links to all those underneath in the show notes. Well, that was a fab conversation. We've managed to keep it so just under the hour, so well done us. Yeah. Final breath as we close. Thank you.
See you soon, sister.
See you soon.
Much love.